the resilience that both metals have been showing here the last couple weeks, I think, is a really good sign. I think if we can consolidate and hold here at these levels, given everything else that we see going on in the world, I think you're due for another. You'll get another big breakout.
Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics, and we are continuing our coverage on in the silver and gold world with quite a bit happening. We continue to see a lot of demand for physical gold and silver across the bullion dealers. We've seen a rise in the price of gold and silver as well over the past month in midst of banking issues. And again, a lot of the market looking to the Fed to begin a pause in their interest rate hiking policy, and markets pricing in some interest rate cuts later this year. The Fed, as we will get to in today's episode, had some interesting comments and about perhaps cutting rates. And either case, to discuss all of this is someone that is well versed in the silver world, also runs Silver Viper, one of the companies that is out exploring for silver. And I'm joined today by Steve Cope. So Steve, great to have you in here today. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, Chris. It's I think it's nice to be on a day where silver and gold are up. Conversation. We haven't had many of those lately, but we've been kind of talking about, and it's nice to see metals prices slowly working their way up, and we've been calling for that for a while, so we're finally right. I guess we can say it enough times, we finally get it right on a few of the calls. But no,
Well,
it's a very
come
interesting.
on now, Steve. We've had a rally over these past couple months, so I'm sure a few of the days we've talked, we've had silver up. We're recording on Tuesday afternoon here. This will be posted on Wednesday after Wednesday morning CPI came out, but at least as of Tuesday afternoon, we see silver back above $25, gold price above 2,000 again. And what I continue to find interesting is that we're seeing this while rates are still being raised. Some of the other central banks around the globe have paused, but Federal Reserve still hiking. And it seems that, though, with the issues in banking and as well as just that, a lot of people are turning to gold and silver along with the de-dollarization that's going on. We see the bigger hand forcing gold and silver higher lately. And perhaps we could start there and get any thoughts you have on how the metals have continued to rally really since back in September of last year, but have took a dip earlier this year and continuing on that rally. And curious your thoughts on all of that.
Yeah, I mean, one of my big moments was actually last night, seeing gold and silver go down, and gold specifically drop below that kind of psychological 2000 number. I was really thinking today was going to not be a great day for gold and silver, and be a little more miserable when the U.S. market open and they step in, and to see it rebound and bounce back and be back up to 2021 and silver over 25. The resilience that both metals have been showing here the last couple weeks, I think, is a really good sign. I think if we can consolidate and hold here at these levels, given everything else that we see going on in the world, I think you're due for another. You'll get another big breakout, and then hopefully at that point we'll start to see those investors pour back into the mining companies and that side of things. We're seeing the silver funds and the gold funds are having zero inflows, even with the rally that's happened, because people are just sitting there on the sideline. The generalist investor is still hesitant to get involved in our space, but the strength of the people that are buying the physical is growing on a daily basis. So I think there's a lot of different things happening right now, and if we get fortunate enough that all these stars align, that's when we're going to start seeing some of these breakouts that a lot of the industry experts have been predicting. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah, well, obviously you touched on the part there of how investors react to it, which sometimes can be different than the actual events that are playing out. And as we were talking about before we hit the record button, I think there's still that feeling that gold and silver are up over the past couple months, yet a lot of trepidation of, okay, is this going to be another gold is up, silver's up, I buy in, and then price gets hammered again. Yet when you think about the position we're in, interesting, prices aren't all that different than they were 12, 13 months ago when the war in Ukraine started. Yet back then we had the Fed getting ready to do this historic, sequence of interest rate hikes versus now you have the opposite going on, or not the entire opposite, as they are still hiking, but markets looking at the next meeting perhaps being the last cut, some possibility of a pause, or the last hike rather, some possibility of being a pause, and the futures markets pricing in hikes throughout the end of the or cuts throughout the end of the year rather, getting them backwards today. So I mean, it's a much different environment. Plus, add on all the tension in the world, banking issues that have arisen as a result of those interest rate hikes. The de-dollarization movement seems to be going on overdrive lately. So, I mean, do you see as much of a risk to the downside given all of that and where we stand right now?
No, I mean, I definitely think. Well, again, I mean, on silver, to me, you still come back to the one fundamental, and that's none of the primary silver producers are making money at $25 silver. They need much higher numbers, and that is a fundamental pricing metric that will always be there. So with inflation, we need silver prices much higher on the silver side for any primary silver producer to be making money. If they have a byproduct, then they're getting by, but they're making most of their revenue off of the byproduct, whether that's gold or copper or zinc, or depending on the type of deposit. But the primary silver producers are disappearing; they're gone. We were talking before the call, but Pan American used to be the number two primary silver producer. Now they're three, or sorry, now they're number nine on the list, and not much bigger than companies that always considered a mid tier silver producer before. So that's a company that's become a gold company, even though their name is still Pan American Silver. They're disappearing because it's not economic for them to make money, and they've owed to their shoulders. They can't be sitting there losing millions and millions of dollars every quarter. So to me, that fundamental mindset that is always going to be there, and why silver shouldn't take that big step backwards. You need silver prices higher for an increase of silver production and start bringing on other deposits, which as we've talked about in the past, given this green movement, which ignore the fact that no, we're not all going 100% electric, but if we go 5% electric, and what that does, when we're already operating at deficit in silver, you need a lot of this new stuff to come on and come online. And if you've got metals prices down, or silver specifically down where it is, you're not going to bring on a lot of the new deposits. There's very few that are economic, and the ones that are, silver is a byproduct, or it certainly has a large component that's another metal. So again, I don't think we're going to see a step back very aggressively in silver. Maybe if there is a pullback, we go briefly back down to 22, 23, 24, but I don't think you're seeing that huge step back. And I think it'll be short lived. I think it'll be that step back before we break out and hit new. And I think the big psychological level is that $30 level. If we can get through that and sustain there, that's when you're really going to see silver break out.
Yeah, and is that when you think we see more money come back into the silver sector? I guess it was back in 2020, late 2020 and 2021, where for a while there were a lot of new projects getting started, and there were a lot of inflows into the industry that really dried up last year. And as we were saying a couple minutes ago, it seems like people are a little bit cautious to jump back in. From the conversations you have and the people you talk with, what do you get the feeling it takes for that to reverse, to see money coming back into the sector?
I mean, for one, people need to see it, sustain and hold. Like, we can't have these, Bitcoin type swings where you go dramatically up and down on given days. You need to see it steadily move. It doesn't need to be huge jumps in a given day. Consolidate, hold, show strength, and then people will start to pick up on the momentum. Because the difference with gold and silver and precious metals is our runs tend to be these long multi-year runs where they're not like some of the other commodities where you get 1 month or 6 months, a year if you're really lucky, on these price swings where, all the stocks go crazy. In gold and silver, it tends to be, 8-10 year cycles that you have when you get into a bull market. And so if we're, early into a bull market now, seeing these things gain, maybe we're a year, 2 years on a macro level, we should start to see money pour in. And I don't know, with gold, obviously gold over 2000 is a good psychological number, but I'm still, from talking with fund managers, not hearing them say that they're getting those inflows even on the gold side. So again, silver, I think 30 is a big psychological number, but it's more of a sustain. We can't have, okay, it's going up, and then something dramatically changes and the Fed somehow, manipulates and hammers the prices down in a few days. And then even if it recovers a couple of weeks later, it's that shell shock that hits people and they're hesitant to pull the trigger to come back in. So we need a long sustained period of time. Those generalist funds that have all been sitting on the sideline, or they've been putting their capital into other sectors, will start to, while they're watching right now, and you're definitely hearing, you're seeing more people attending conferences, you're seeing more requests where people are doing their due diligence, but to see that capital redeployed and come back in will take a bit more time, but it's coming. It's definitely, we're getting there.
And do you think we're going to reach a point also where, with not a lot of new projects being initiated and not perhaps as much exploration, that some of the larger companies are going to be going fishing for some of the junior projects and exploration sites that are out there, where it seems like there's a little bit of a lack of projects going on? Do you expect that we'll see consolidation at some point?
I think there's two levels to that. You need to see, again, there's always way too many junior companies out there all going to the same groups to get funded, whether that's the mining companies and looking for strategic investments or going to the funds. There is a large consensus from the funds right now that there needs to be consolidation amongst the juniors. They'd rather see companies now that have three or four good assets, and that one company coming to them, as opposed to, four single asset companies coming and approaching them and saying, finance us. So there's going to be consolidation on that level. And then there's also going to be either the strategic investments from the big mining companies, because their reserves are depleting. And there's lots of pressure on them from their shareholders to continue their production profile or expand it. So those guys, as they start to make, more money, and the gold guys have been making pretty good money, but with inflation, some of the higher cost gold companies are, coming out with pretty big all-in sustaining costs now, which even isn't the true number because that doesn't include any of the companies, G&A and built into that. So again, as gold prices move up, those, and the gold companies are making more money, they're going to get more active and interested and start, redeploying that capital that they're making, but they need to build up their balance sheets as well. So again, I think you're going to see that this year. You'll start to see some of those guys getting more aggressive on either acquiring other, mid-tier producers or junior producers, investing in the exploration companies because they know, that's where they're not very good at that. They need companies like ours to make those discoveries and de-risk earlier stage assets. And then you're going to see consolidation amongst companies like ours, we're just where the ones that have set themselves apart will start to gobble up other companies that are weaker but have good assets. And again, I think you'll see a much more attractive sector kind of after this year with less companies out there.
Yeah, and along those lines, one of the things that we hear quite a bit is that the easy deposits have been found, and there's less out there to pick through. Does that match what you've been seeing? Obviously, there are some things out there to look at, but I mean, is it, we're reaching the point where, especially at today's price, where there's not enough feasible projects out there that can be found, and that the easy ones are already off the board?
Yeah, and I mean, technology's come a little ways, but under trying to drill blindly undercover, there's still not, that magical Star Trek device that scans the like the Earth and says there's silver right here and there's this much of it. It's, you still need a drill rig and you still got to go and look for it. Geophysics and other things help, but until you put the drill into it, you can't prove up an asset, and it's hard to find something drilling blindly. So yeah, I mean, the near surface stuff in, quality jurisdictions or any jurisdiction are harder and harder to find. You've got to get more off the beaten path, and then you add in, geopolitical risk and the countries and what's going on, and that market, a lot of the traditional silver countries are, like Peru and Chile have nationalized. Mexico's kept going, but there's stuff going on politically there that make people at least pay attention to what's happening. But you're talking about, 1, 2, and 3 in the world in silver production, and two of the three right now you're not seeing any exploration really. And in Chile's case, you've already nationalized, and yeah, I mean, it's harder and harder to find silver projects in general, but then it's even harder to find them in good jurisdictions where you're actually gonna be able to take the thing and put it into production.
Yeah, and you did mention Mexico in there, and something that I know many people have heard about, perhaps some have not yet, but there were some proposed mining reforms in Mexico that came out, which would certainly not encourage new investment there. Again, these are proposals, not policy, but talking about limiting the permitting to 15 years as opposed to 50, a whole bunch of other things that would make it harder to mine. Anything that you could pass along about the proposals that Mexico is looking at?
Yeah, I mean Mexico's been weird. I mean under AMLO, there's he's obviously more left, and there's been a lot of pushes. His public, what he said publicly has been, to his base, but not a lot has really happened in his time, and so his time isn't that much. We're not that much longer under AMLO. He came out and said this. From what I've heard, there's been an intense pushback politically from other parties on these proposals. The 50 to 15-year thing is, honestly, that's asinine. Given how long it takes to permit things and the life that you would have now, existing concessions would be fine. But again, to new concessions to say you would only have 15 years on an exploration license is nuts. You would never do it's you're by the time the average mine to production is at least 10 years. So, around the world now. So again, you got a 15-year concession that would make it very difficult on a lot of exploration companies. But again, we'll see what ends up actually coming from that proposal. Is like I said, there's been a pretty intense pushback from a lot of political parties, from what I've heard on that front. So we'll monitor that and see what that looks like moving forward. But again, it's when you get these governments that swing, far left in a lot of these countries, it's worse in Peru and Chile and other parts of South America, but it's something to monitor. And again, those are the biggest silver producing countries in the world. So, and then if okay, we'll go somewhere else. Or we're gonna go look in Russia? I don't think so. Not right now. Not for the companies that do that exploration. The Western companies looking. We're not going to go into China and start exploring their resources because they're already, aggressively doing that and mining it. Australia is not big for silver. Africa's not big for silver. So you've shrunk a lot of the world here. Where are you going to get it from? It comes back, and number one is Mexico. So to do anything to affect that, and what that would do, if the companies stop exploring and looking for it, what does that do to Mexico's economy? It's one of their top industries, again, for bringing revenue and tax dollars. And if you're going to limit it or do it in a way where companies aren't going to explore, well, that's not going to be a very popular decision for most governments.
Yeah, certainly seems to be in contradiction to. I mean, we have on one hand the policies of wanting to go green, yet making things harder to mine, and already it seems a little bit unimaginable that some of these green mandates are possible even under ideal conditions. Yet, certainly, if something like this were to go through, which, at least from a mining perspective, you would hope that would not be the case, but and certainly, I don't know, even from an economic perspective, with such a rich history of mining in Mexico, that losing a lot of revenue and jobs created there, and obviously just not an ideal situation.
Well, your local communities are so supportive. It's just like, we've been in Mexico for decades as a group, and everywhere we've gone and operated in the states we operate in Mexico, it is overwhelming support. They love the mining companies coming in. They want jobs for their kids. They want, the improvement. Even if we're on the exploration side in a small company, just when we're constantly giving back to those communities, whether it's school supplies, jerseys, sports equipment, medical gear, they would rather their kids get a job working for a mining company down the road as opposed to going in and working for the cartel, and or a cartel, which one you're talking about. But it's overwhelming support from those communities everywhere we've worked. I've never ever felt that we had a community against us on any project that we've been exploring on. So again, if you have a government that steps in and prevents those communities from getting that better quality of lifestyle by a choice, like you're going to have anarchy and revolt in that country because it's so ingrained. Mining is so ingrained into their culture that it's what most people they know and they're comfortable with. And it's been specifically the Canadian companies that have come down there and found deposits, and then whether you let a Mexican company like Fresnillo buy it and produce it, or one of the other Canadian or American producers that come down and buy it and produce, like these are huge amounts of tax dollars for that country. So again, I think it would be political suicide to do anything to it.
How prevalent would you say it is where there are companies that go in and do abuse the protocol or don't act as good stewards? I mean, we hear a lot of protests about things like that. I mean, obviously you have quite a bit of experience, perhaps not in doing that yourself, but in the mining industry. Is that as common as is often portrayed, or how often does that actually play out like that?
I mean, again, I'm not working for every. I haven't worked for most of the producers that operate in Mexico, but from my experience, the Canadian companies specifically are held to such a high standard that what we're doing in Mexico is way above and beyond what any even Mexican mining company would be doing. If it was a public Mexican mining that isn't answering to the same rules, we're environmentally held to such high standards because we're not only answering to shareholders, but also to the court systems, not only in Mexico, but the country like Canada's rules and regulations of what we're allowed to do. So again, I mean, it's one of those things where the movie industry, it's the mining guys are the bad guys. They're always they're coming in to, rape and pillage the land and screw over the local. And that is not my experience in the industry at all. I mean, I'm sure there are bad guys out there and that are exceptions to the rule, but the rules and regulations that we're held accountable to across the board, there's no room for that whatsoever. And no mining company or shareholder or board of a mining company wants to have accidents happen. No question. If you're, but the standards that these companies are held to now and what they're trained and what they're pushed to do to help out local communities. I've worked for other companies in Mexico before coming to the Belcara Group. And, one of them, we built a university to start teaching locals to give them better jobs in the mine so they could, a technical university in the local community. So they could be trained and weren't, wasn't people coming from other parts of the bigger cities in Mexico, that they could go in and they could get trained and get those bigger jobs in the mine. And that's been my experience from talking with most of the big, CEOs that I've met with in the industry, is they're doing anything they can across the board to help out the industry. Whenever the government gets involved in these areas, that's where those communities end up not getting, the capital and the resources that the mining companies were giving to them directly. So again, I mean, that's not my history or what I've seen in the industry, whether it's in Mexico or other parts of the world at all, from the Canadian mining companies and the US mining companies perspectives. It's, you might see locals that want to, skip rules and aren't used to following and don't have to report to the standards that we're held to. But no, the mining companies are good. And the other one that always gets me is, okay, we're in the middle of this green movement. Okay, we want copper, cobalt, nickel, silver, all these different important parts that go into making solar, go into making electric cars. And that same environmentalist, if they're decide, it's in their backyard, or, they don't want the mining, but they want the electric cars. They want, these different various things, or, you get some projects, they're flying on their private jets, but we don't want a mine to open up. It's, the disconnect of what can happen because people think it's popular to say, no, the mining companies are evil. But if you want electric cars and you want solar and wind and all the materials that go into these, there's a lot of mining that's needed. But you need to trust the companies, like I'm saying, that are from reputable, that are held to those higher standards. They're going to come in and they're going to do a good job, and they're going to do right by the environment, and they're going to do right by the local communities. They're going to, the local communities in Mexico, their quality of life goes up so much, even from when an exploration company gets in. Never mind when you cut your deals and start dealing with the mining companies and the boom that is for building and housing and, the jobs in the mine and their income levels. It's huge for those local communities. It's life changing. and nothing there's you don't have those big environmental concerns. Like there's deposits, but again, we go through environmental studies, we go through everything. Like there are deposits out there that have too much arsenic or too much, other things, or you go through all those environmental procedures, and where again there's set standards in the industry of what you can do and what's acceptable and what and the environment is very well protected. It's and in the grand scheme of things, you need it to do. You want electric cars, you want to drive around and do right by the environment on that level. Well, let's be smart about how we manage and permit. We need to speed up the permitting process to some level for these deposits to bring them on to meet that demand that's coming and streamline things. But again, there's the right mining company should be doing that mining, and they should be encouraged to do so, so we can get to that end goal of being green and using our electric cars and getting the supplies that are needed for that. So I think you're going to see those car companies start to buy mines directly and hire teams to run the mines so they can um, control their supply. And again, they'll need to be held to those same standards as they run a mine, but there are teams out there that they'll be able to hire, whether they buy a company and just take the team. That's probably their avenue they'll go. But it's good. It's good for the world. We need that mining to create this other environment. And if you don't do that, then you're going back to like Germany right now, where we've got coal being burned again. Like, I mean, it's just there's such a disconnect oftentimes, and there's an education that's been lacking, and it's kind of like like the Jaws movie, like the Great White Shark's evil because Jaws hates the people in a movie, and you picture back and you have these nightmares about it. It's the same thing that's happened for mining. It's been portrayed the mining guys were always evil, so it's just ingrained in your back of your head that those mining companies must be evil and stealing. But it's when you get there on the ground and you see how happy the communities are, supportive they are, it's not the case at all.
Yeah, and certainly is unfortunate the way that there is that stereotype portrayed, and but like you point out, you have a bit of a divergence where if you want to continue to make these shifts that the governments are talking about, it's something that you're going to need. And one other thing I wanted to touch on that we did mention before, this one is back to the Federal Reserve, global central banks, but something that you mentioned before we started talking, a recent report from the IMF about interest rates eventually should fall back to levels seen before the outbreak of COVID, with advanced economies again within sight of the zero lower bound. Then, along with that, on Tuesday, we had Fed's William. If inflation falls, we will have to lower interest rates. So again, this goes back to what we talked about as we were beginning the show, where which way are we headed? I mean, maybe we have another hike or two in there, but almost to some degree, it's like why even bother hiking at all? You're just was that just to create some issues with the banks to make things more entertaining as we go along? But again, any thoughts on these two items where suggesting that regardless of what we've seen in the past year or we might see in the next month or so, that can get a good idea of where we're heading?
Yeah, I mean, again, we'll see what the Fed does. I mean, they put enough pressure that they've already had banks fail. I know they've said, well, whatever, we're stepping in and we're going to provide trillions of support so none of these other banks fail. But the stress on the banks is immense right now. So to raise rates further is just going to put more stress there. But again, they're already looking for an excuse to go lower and go back to where we were to support. Governments don't like people struggling to get by, and their dollar not going as far. So if they can print money and stimulate the economy, and that's always been a popular move. It's not the right move long run for a healthy country, but people don't want to be the bad guys. They don't want to be the government that hurt everyone because they don't tend to get reelected. So yeah, I mean, I think we are certainly. Canada announced before this last little bit, we raised aggressively, but then said our banks have been adamant that we're done raising rates, with the expectation that by the end of the year ours will be lower. I know Europe's lagged behind a bit there, so maybe they'll have a few more rate hikes. If the US does, maybe one more quarter point hike, maybe two at most. But again, I think they need to be pausing and looking to go lower because the people are struggling. You've got these interest rates. You've already in our country, they raised rates so fast that you started hitting trigger points on everyone's variable mortgages, which knocked the housing prices down in our country pretty aggressively because it wasn't like all of a sudden people's payments changed. In some cases, they were doubling, overnight.
Right.
That was a huge issue, and it's definitely made people sell and downsize and slowed our market down, which our government in Canada had been pushing for quite a while. They're trying to figure out a way they could cool off our housing market, and stumbled onto one through this rate hike raises as an excuse. But we've said we're done because it's put too much pressure on people on top of inflation and what the costs of groceries and everything else that continue to go up. We've seen these rate hikes not knock down those those inflationary numbers. They've been able to manipulate them a bit with fuel prices and tapping into reserves and different things to make the inflation numbers look like they're slowing down. But raising interest rates here hasn't stopped inflation. It's not the type of inflation that you stop with interest rate hikes, and we've said that from the beginning. So again, I mean, you're raising rates to have an excuse to lower them. The U.S. had never wanted to go into negative rates, so okay, we went through this rapidly rising environment. Now they're going to lower them, and yeah, I'm sure we will be back down close to 0% again. Well, over the next year, 2 years, but see.
Well, it seems like that is the trend that it's headed in, and which is again one of the things that we'll be looking to with the silver and gold prices, and especially on the silver side. So be a lot to keep an eye on. And Steve, of course, before we wrap up, perhaps you could give us an update on how things are coming along at Silver Viper. I know you also had some news out last week, and perhaps you could catch us up to speed there.
Yeah, it was just we renegotiated our final project payment given the state of the market. We want to thank our partners and being understanding. We had a total payment of $2.5 million coming, of which half could be paid in shares at our discretion. But that was causing us issues just with people seeing a large cash payment coming, given the state of how difficult it's been to finance in the mining sector. So our partners were very understanding. We've lowered that payment to $200,000 this year, and then one more $200,000 payment next year to get 100% of our internal claims on our project. The rest will be issued out in shares. Both one batch has already been issued at $1.5 million worth of stock, and the rest of the balance is issued next June for $775,000 US worth of shares. Again, it's been a great for our partners. It's again made sure that the dollars that we are bringing in through placements are going to be going into the ground to drill, where we want the dollars spent. And our partners, seeing where share prices are at now, are firm believers that the shares are the better way to go anyways, because all of the mining company stocks have been kicked so aggressively this last year that getting our shares at the price they're getting them at now, they're going to do way better financially on those share gains than they would by just giving cash at the moment. So again, our partners have been great and understanding. It's again, these are in the case of the partners we're talking about here, then they're locals in the community that had those claims. They're from the state of Sonora. They're local Mexicans, and they understand the needs and the industry, and again, they want mining. They want us doing work on the project. So it's great for our investors. It's great for our partners. It's great for us as a company. Just again, we're really thrilled to be able to work through and have a more attractive agreement in place now on the project.
Yeah, and in terms of the drilling going forward, anything you could share about what you'll be doing throughout the rest of the year now as we're in April, so about a little over a third of the way through, and anything you could share about the drilling plans?
Yeah, we're just finalizing the last tranche of the placement that we announced a while ago. Once that's completed, we're looking to start a smaller drill program up to 5,000 meters to get going. As we get into a better market, we'll look to raise additional capital to expand on that program. We're at a point, or we've been at a point now for the last 8 months, that we would like to have 2, 3, 4 rigs turning on the project, testing all these different targets in these new areas that we know we're going to make additional discoveries on the project. And it's just, this market has been so difficult that we've had to slow things down and make sure that we're conserving capital, but we're ready to go. We want to get a drill program going very quickly and start getting, the drilling news flow out there. We've been putting out a lot of really good sampling numbers that, again, they're identifying new targets. We've got a bunch more samples into the lab that we're expecting to get back, and we expect another release here highlighting some more high grade samples and new targets that weren't being drill tested for new discovery. So it's going to be a combination of expanding on our existing discovery at El Ruby, and then also trying to make new discoveries that are always really good for share prices when you can make a new discovery on a different part of the project.
Well, we will certainly be looking forward to that as you go throughout the year. And I know you're excited to get out there and continue the drilling again. And Steve, just before we wrap up, could you let folks know if they have questions about the project, would like to reach you, what is the best way to do that?
Yeah, email is very easy. It goes to myself and Alicia. Info@silverviperminerals.com. All the information is on the website, www.silverviperminerals.com. In the contact section, you can see our phone number if you want to reach out, and we have all of our direct lines there through our office line that come to us if we're not in the office. Again, just the information's there. You can see that email. There's the website. Please feel free to reach out to us, and whether it's about the company or whether it's about silver and gold in general, we're more than happy to engage and discuss anything.
Well, Steve, I appreciate that. And fun as always talking about silver and looking at the way things have progressed, where we might be headed from here. Certainly a lot that I think silver investors happy to see that the price is higher than it has been. Excited for the potential that's out there, and did a good job of laying out some of the reasons why that is the case. So thanks again for making some time, Steve Cope of Silver Viper, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next month.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.